and you hear it come in on one side on the headphones. And to me, that moment is just brain melting for me.
Hmm.
It's the closest I think I can come to an acid trip without actually taking something. Hey, everybody, this is TJR.
And this is Robert Kinsler.
And the Beatles Red and Blue albums, 2023 editions, originally released in 1973 as the Beatles 1962 to 1966 and the Beatles 1967 to 1970 came out today. Originally, these double vinyl album compilations were big sellers back in the early 70s. And truth be told, they were my first Beatle albums. They were basically my gateway drug to the Beatles music. After I got these, I began to work my way into getting the studio albums. I know that for a lot of fans around my age who didn't get to hear them till after they broke up, which was my experience, this was their start as well. I wanted to ask you, Robert, what was your experience? Was your experience similar or was it different?
Well, as people may or may not know, I'm actually a couple of years older than you. So my parents actually, they were very young at the time, and I was like literally a toddler here. They bought Meet the Beatles. I think my parents, I remember my dad loved the Ed Sullivan Show. He watched the Ed Sullivan Show when the Beatles were on there, and he probably went out and bought Meet the Beatles along with the rest of America, right?
Hmm.
So I literally remember being a little kid sitting on this chair, and I would play Meet the Beatles over and over and over again. But they also, I remember, bought Magical Mystery Tour, and I loved it because it had the booklet. But I loved that album. And then by the time they bought the White Album, I was a little bit older, and man, I just lived with that album. It could probably hum every note. I mean, I loved it. And so my original experience actually with the Beatles was through my parents. They would buy the music, and then I would obviously commandeer it. And sometimes even in the middle of the night, I'd be sneaking in the other part of the house playing Beatles records. So
Wow. So you got to experience them while they were still together.
yes, I did. Although
Yeah.
I was too young to, like I said, it's funny, TJ. I remember the Ed Sullivan Show, certain things about it, but I don't remember seeing them on it at the time. Although I have all those episodes on these DVD reissues now as well. But I can tell you the music made a deep connection with me, and I think kind of with probably the majority of everyone at that time. Generations spanning from little kids like me to my parents who were in their 20s. So
Wow.
I think their music obviously was an explosion. In terms of its influence on everybody.
Wow. Your experience, and this is the first time I've ever heard this too, because your experience is so much different from mine. I have mentioned it previously on this channel, but my parents came from a completely different generation. And rock and pop music was completely foreign to them. They grew up with the big band music. And I even have a memory of watching the movie Help for the first time on TV. And my dad walking in on it and just making I don't want to say what he said exactly, but just to my mom, making what's the word I should use? Disparaging remarks. Because he didn't understand this music. It
Yeah.
was completely foreign to him. He was of a different generation. That's to be expected. And I'm sure there are other people who had that kind of experience where there was this generational divide when it came to the music. And that
Yeah.
was my experience. My parents were a lot older than yours, obviously. Getting back to the Red and Blue albums, those were my first albums. After I accumulated the studio albums, I didn't need the Red and Blue albums anymore, so I let them go. When they were re-released on CD, I didn't bother because, again, I got all the studio albums on CD. I think that the last time they were re-released was the 2009 remasters. And if I recall correctly, all the studio albums came out and then the red and blue is kind of added at the end. I think that's probably why a lot of fans didn't bother with it that time. And I think that is why this time around, they're doing it this way. Rather than waiting till each album gets its remix series, which they're eventually all going to get. I have no doubt about that. They're all going to get they may not get a big super deluxe box set like some of the previous ones have, but they will, I do believe they will all get the remix treatment. But by doing it this way, however, it's basically giving an incentive to longtime fans like us to want to repurchase it, because you're basically getting a preview of what's to come. I also think that re-releasing these albums now with the new track that came out last week, I think it's likely to bring new fans into the fold. Younger generation fans who will start with these compilations in the same way that I and a lot of people did, and then start exploring the studio albums from there. I think that's going to be part of it too. Even if they just do it through streaming, they listen to Red and Blue through streaming, get more interest, and then start exploring the albums themselves. So I think there's a lot to do with that too. So anyways, though, we're going to talk about the mixes. We're not going to go track by track. We're just going to talk about some of our main thoughts. I will add that these 2023 reissues are in expanded form. They feature additional tracks not included on the original releases. The Blue album features 6 remixes, never before released. But on the Red album, almost every track from the Red album is a new remix, with the exception of the tracks featured on last year's Revolver album remix. Overall, what are your feelings?
Yeah, overall, I'd say that there's a strong clarity here. I mean, you're hearing things you've never heard before. What struck me the most is just how prominent the drums are across many of these new mixes. You do really realize how amazing of drummer he is, because a lot of times I just think previously, probably, and hopefully we're not getting too much in the weeds when we start talking about available tracks, but when you and I went into the studio with bands, the drummer, they might have 8 tracks to record the drums. I think when the Beatles went in, it was much more limited, trying to get the bass and the snare and the toms so that they could all be heard really clearly. But now with technology, all of a sudden Ringo's drum tracks are it's as if they were recorded now in this year, and you really hear them. And a couple other points, you heard Paul's bass, same thing, where maybe I hadn't noticed it, or it was just kind of just mixed in. Now all of a sudden you really hear the definitive bass parts. And I found that very exciting as a musician, hearing all that. And because it's like your ears are being more opened into the magic of the Beatles.
Yeah, it felt to me like I was at times like I was right next to his kit.
Exactly.
I could not believe it.
Exactly.
How insanely good the drums felt. I think that was probably one of the strongest takeaways. And again, this is due to the new demixing technology. They couldn't have remixed Revolver without that. And all these tracks, on the Red album, these earlier tracks, again, locked in. But now with the demixing technology, they can really get in there. I expected the Red album to sound good, but I didn't expect the Red album to be as much of a revelation as it was. I'm going to talk about maybe a couple of the highlights for me. And if there's any highlights you want to talk about, please do. First of all, and I'm trying to go in chronological order here, Day Tripper. The amount of separation and clarity between every single instrument was absolutely astounding. In some ways, better than any of the previous remixes, as far as just separation, clarity between the instruments. I was really blown away by that. I don't know if you have anything to say about that, other than
yes. I just piling on. I agree with you. It's really spectacular. It's in many ways, not that you're hearing it for the first time, but in a way it is. It's like, wow, like I never heard that before. I mean, that's kind of the reaction you get listening to many of these tracks.
The next one that I would bring up that surprised me, because I wasn't expecting it, was Yesterday. I honestly wasn't expecting much from Yesterday, because it's such a sparse recording. You've got Paul's vocal, his acoustic guitar, and then you've got the string instruments. It's very sparse.
Yeah.
And yet I was amazed at the level of heightened detail to the string instruments. I must have always heard these little string parts going on while he's singing in the past. I must have always heard them. And I'm sure if I go back to hear the original stereo mixes from 2009, the remasters, I should say, I'll hear them now. But I really noticed them listening to the remix. I was absolutely blown away by Yesterday in a way I didn't expect.
Again, it sounds like a pretty sparse track, and you wouldn't have thought that would have been that very different. But yet, it's one of those things that you just, not only do you hear things differently, but you feel often you're actually feeling like there's something different here, and it's really special. And I agree with you about that.
The next one that really struck me, actually the next two, I should say, are off of Rubber Soul. And of course, we all thought we'd be getting the Rubber Soul remix this year. We'd get the box set. I'm still waiting in line for that Rubber Soul remix and Super Deluxe box set. If they haven't, hopefully they have enough tracks to do a box set. But the two tracks that really blew me away on the Red album, Nowhere Man, which has always been one of my all-time favorite Beatles songs.
Oh, me too. We agree. Yeah.
So I was real anxious to hear the remix. All I will say is this remix was just everything I could have hoped for.
Yeah.
I don't know if I've heard anything new, but I heard everything at such a level of clarity that it was like hearing it again for the first time for me.
Yeah.
I was really, really pleased with that one. The other one, If I Needed Someone, a track that I always really liked, but this time I will say the word again, revelatory.
Yeah.
I like the track so much better now than I did previously.
Yeah.
It really blew me away.
Now, rewinding just a little bit, I'm going to read this off my notes here. Nowhere Man, I said, this mix is so sumptuous. And then I put the word wow. You are immersed in the mix. Also, it provides you a preview of the forthcoming Rubber Soul reissue. So we're on the same page there, TJ. And If I Needed Someone has always been one of my favorite George Harrison tracks. And boy, I finally feel like I've heard what it must have been like to be in the studio when they're with their instruments and setting it to tape. I mean, wow, it's just glorious. I couldn't agree with, good observations on your part.
Did you have any other observations on the Red album? Any track highlights for you that you want to talk about before we talk about the Blue album?
Norwegian Wood. I thought that was just amazing. I loved how the sitar and guitar fit in together, and I didn't remember it ever sounding quite that spectacular and luxurious before. And just that one jumped out at me as well. And that's another one of those tracks I've always loved, and it sounded great here.
One other side note, I did kind of wish that Help had the whole James Bond intro that was originally there when you first bought back in the day. The original release of the Red album had that little James Bond intro that opened it before it started. I wish it had still been there. I found out later I never bought the re-releases of the Red and Blue albums on CD, so I didn't know that they had taken that away on that. I wish, for the sake of just, in respect to the original, that they had kept that there, but they didn't. It's a minor nitpick, but I wish it had been there. Also, with the Red albums, I just wanted to mention the inclusion of covers like Twist and Shout, which became more iconic than the original.
And TJ, John's vocals on that just, I mean, man, it's like, wow, you just rediscover the magic of the Beatles and just that early power that they had, and how they excited the world with that kind of youthful exuberance and stuff. Just a great recording.
And I just wanted to add, and also covers like You Really Got a Hold on Me by Smokey Robinson, because none of the covers were ever put on the original Red album. So it was good to have some of those there just to help represent their early influences and show that part of them. Because I think these collections really are the best retrospectives that you could probably put out. We might all argue on certain picks, but I think overall, if I was to go to somebody who doesn't know the Beatles, like one of my nieces or nephews, this would be the best way, I think, to introduce them. Anyways, let's talk about the Blue album now. We don't have as many remixes here because a lot of this has already been remixed. I'm going to talk about first Magical Mystery Tour, the title track. And I noticed this electric rhythm guitar that comes in and out, mostly during the choruses. During the first half of the chorus, it's not there, and then during the second half, it is. So much more distinct and concise now. I don't think I'd ever really noticed it before.
I had not either. I had not. Yeah. I think
it was mostly buried. And so, yeah, to hear some of this, like I said, these things coming out that, you know, you hadn't heard before. Really nice to hear these things. You mentioned Old Brown Shoe, and you mentioned Paul's bass coming out, you know, being emphasized in a lot of the tracks. I'm sorry, I don't think you mentioned Old Brown Shoe. You mentioned Paul's bass.
Old Brown Shoe was one of the tracks that it was sounded different, but I wouldn't say it was necessarily improved. Most tracks that I heard here that have new mixes, I was pretty excited by. That one, you know, I'm not as critical about it as one of the other tracks I think we might both be talking about in a minute, I'm sure, because it's the one that's got the most attention. I do like that song, but I didn't think that this mix, even though it had more of that pronounced bass on it, necessarily overall the mix excited me as many of the other tracks that we've been talking about.
And now, since you brought it up, let's discuss the elephant in the room.
Let's do.
Yes. And of course, I'm sure a lot of you already know what we're about to say. We're discussing I Am the Walrus, which is probably the most radical and potentially the most controversial of all these new mixes. So who shall start with this?
Well, let me start first, TJ, by saying over the years, us being a music writer for so many years and also doing these great videos with you, people will ask me, what's your favorite Beatles song? And I love, just about everything they ever recorded, I'm a huge fan of. But if someone had a gun to my head, and let's hope that doesn't happen,
yes,
I would probably say I Am the Walrus is it's just the song that, like I said, I can't believe it was recorded well over 50 years ago, because it almost sounds like something Radiohead could have done a couple of years ago. It's such an amazing, not only is it timeless, but it just blows me away, just everything about it. But I would say that this is the mix, especially the end. I just sounded a little disconcerting. I'm not really necessarily a fan of it, at least yet. I mean, I'm going to give it subsequent listens and try to be open to it. But I was a little disappointed. I mean, certain things about it, the cellos are more prominent, and I didn't mind that. I like a lot of the strings and stuff, but the mix is very different than what we've heard in the past.
Yeah. This is the first time it's been remixed. In the past, we've just gotten a remastering of the actual original stereo mix. And of course, there was the mono mixes that we got that were the original mono mixes when we got the mono set in 2009. So here are some of my observations. A lot of times we criticize the original stereo mixes because of the extreme separation in them.
Mm-hmm.
But however, with I Am the Walrus, the extreme stereo separation on the original stereo mix works better for me than in the mono mix, because when I hear those first there's that electric keyboard do do do, and then we have the strings, just those kind of swooping strings, and you hear it come in on one side on the headphones, and to me, that moment is just brain melting for me. It's the closest I think I can come to an acid trip without actually taking something when that moment comes in. So I feel like some of that got lost in this new stereo mix. This is a personal preference, okay? That's all it is. Mm-hmm. And that's all any of this is our personal thoughts, our personal experiences. Right. And I just want to add now, your personal experience is just as valid, but this is ours. I also felt that John Lennon's vocals on a majority of it feel a lot drier and less processed than on the original. In the original, there is more of that chorusing imaging effect on his vocals that I think works better for it. Whereas in a lot of it, it feels more dry and it has less presence. Okay. I don't think that works as well. At least that's my feeling right now. I will admit that after I was done with I Am the Walrus, after I heard it the first time, I honestly wasn't sure if I could say I like this. Mm-hmm. But that is not unnatural, because we have lived with these songs sounding a certain way for a long time.
Yeah.
And with a lot of this remixing, and everybody has different opinions about it. Some people don't like the remixes. Some people really do. I think the majority of Beatle fans appreciate them. But Giles Martin has always kind of stayed he's tried his best to stay close to what the original mixes sound like, yet still give us an enhanced experience. Here, he's making some very radical and bold moves. Yeah. And I'll discuss some more of my notes here. The oompa oompa, everybody's got one, and there are different versions of what they're actually saying. Everybody argues that. Okay. I just looked up the lyrics online, and I'm going with that. They don't sound as big and as all-encompassing as on the original mixes. But that's because so many other audio elements are being brought out in this new mix. So yes, they're not going to be as prominent.
They're kind of all fighting for space,
Yes.
Even though you have, like you said, all this technology, but the fact of the matter is, if you primarily hear the drums and bass, and you're not going to hear the guitars and the vocals,
they're all that fighting.
Work. Yeah, they're all fighting. Right. Yeah.
The ending of the song, of course, is what everybody talks about, how the sound of the various sound effects that we heard coming in and out during the song's fade out, the radio stations being switched back and forth. Right. Initially, I thought that was the Beatles themselves. When I first heard these, I thought it was the Beatles themselves just saying nonsensical things, goofing off and it just being kind of cross mixed. But it's actually a radio station being tuned in and out of different stations. All of that starts to overpower the music. I believe this was done deliberately. And it now becomes kind of like reminiscent of Revolution Number 9. And the audio collage takes precedence near the end over the music. The music will kind of come back a bit, but then the audio collage comes back. So I kind of compare it as a cross between I Am the Walrus and Revolution Number 9 at this point.
Yeah.
A lot of fans did not care for this. I myself wasn't sure. But like I said, in time, I may learn to appreciate it more and experience it as something totally a new way to enjoy it. To give some context to this, I played it for my partner and she listened to it and she liked it right off the bat. As much as she loves the original, she said, she really enjoyed it. She said, this is just a whole new way to enjoy it. So again, it all depends.
Yeah.
And in time, I may appreciate it more. Maybe I just need time, but definitely I know this is going to, there's going to be a lot of controversy about this among fans, longtime fans.
Yeah, I think so.
I think what would be interesting is to sit with somebody who's never heard either before, which I think would be very hard to do. And hey, which one do you like better?
Yeah.
Here's the original stereo. Here's this new remix. Right. Don't tell them which is which. Just let them decide what they like better and just see what they think.
A very interesting experiment, to be sure.
Yeah, I think that would be a thing to do. Like I said, the Blue album don't have as much to say because most of it has been previously remixed. We've talked about those already. One point I will bring up that I'm glad to see is that A Day in the Life, this version, while it does say it's the previous remix, it is the version that eliminates the applause from the Sgt. Pepper reprise. If you put in Sgt. Pepper and you play it, and you play the track A Day in the Life, you will hear the fade out of the applause from Sgt. Pepper reprise. Whereas on the Blue album, that was always eliminated. It opens with just the acoustic guitar coming in and then the piano. It's a totally different opening. I'm glad it's still that version. Overall, there is nothing I would say that I disliked about any of these remixes, but I'm still processing I Am the Walrus.
Yeah.
I'm still not sure what I think.
And the one other track I want to quickly highlight, DJ, is I loved Hey Bulldog. I believe that is a 2023 mix. And my notes here, very succinct what I wrote. I said, this is a terrific mix. The vocals and instruments are perfect and collectively elevate an already great song to even greater heights. And this is another one of those, I was playing it and then I had to play it again. It was just so kill. It just rocked. And, what can you say? It's the Beatles.
One last thing I'll say, regardless if you think of the choices as far as the newer tracks, what was on the original, and as far as the remixes are concerned, including I Am the Walrus, just remember Paul McCartney had to approve of it. Ringo Starr had to approve of it. And so did Yoko Ono and Olivia Harrison. They all had to approve of these remixes, and that includes I Am the Walrus. So just be aware of that. Any final thoughts before we go?
No. I think I'm looking forward to hearing these these
Yes.
tracks again, and then hopefully, and then seeing how they sit with me, like I said, a few months from now.
Yeah, I'm going to be listening, especially to the Red album. I'm going to be listening to it a lot over the next month or so, an awful lot. In fact, I feel more incentivized now to maybe pick up the Red one at least. So at this point now, we just want to turn it over to you and ask you, what do you think? Tell us your positives. Tell us your negatives. Let us know what you think of I Am the Walrus. And we'll be curious to hear what y'all have to say. As always, if you like these videos, be sure to hit like, hit subscribe, hit the bell notification icon so you never miss a video. Thank you, patron supporters. Patron supporters do receive exclusive weekly videos not available on this channel. And Robert, thank you so much for joining today. And I don't know, maybe we should come back, and if we have any thoughts, maybe a month from now. I don't know if we'll have anything that we think is unique to say, but if we do, let's maybe do that. Let's come back.
Yeah, that would be fun.
Absolutely. Everybody, thank you so much for watching. We really do appreciate it. And we'll see you all in the next video. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.